Okay, so now that we have an idea of the Malthusian growth trap, we can now compare Ricardo and Malthus with respect to their respective solutions to solve the problem. So David Ricardo essentially said that we should get rid of the corn laws, which would increase the food supply, and that reduces the real wages and expands economic opportunities for the poor. So the Ricardian solution is, if we take a look at the gray trajectories, functions. So here we had the population, and here the other one is food. And then let's say there is a point where food production is no longer anymore able to feed the population. So here we have the Malthusian growth trap. But by shifting the food supply through a dismantling of the corn laws and a return to free trade, we can prolong the time until this alleged crisis will occur. And that was the Ricardian solution. Very humane. So we use trade in order to make the lives of the vulnerable easier. But Malthus, on the other hand, because at the time in England there was a discussion which was that the fast population growth rate was explained by too many poor people who would have too many children, essentially. And at the time, England had so-called poor laws, and those poor laws were not necessarily meant to make the poor better off, because a lot of the social safety nets, they were provided by churches. So the poor, they could go to a church and they could get food and shelter there. But then England introduced poor laws, and again those poor laws were not meant to make the lives of the poor less miserable, but essentially more miserable. So the poor laws, they said things like, you are only entitled to get help if you work and if you have a job. But the overall idea was to slow down the population growth rate through the poor laws. But the poor laws were literally meant to reduce the likelihood that poor people will have children. So that was a byproduct of the approach by David Ricardo, which was to say, look, that presumably inevitable point where there will be not enough food to feed the population, well, that point that can be pushed further into the future through more trade, which is way more humane than saying, we have to push that point of a crash further in the future by already making it more difficult for the poor to survive another day. Okay, so that is the historical context a little bit during which you have to see the creation of Ricardo's trade theory, which we will start exploring beginning with the next video. But just to summarize again, so Initially, trade was perceived as a zero-sum game. Then David Ricardo introduced a theory that we will work on now that shows no, trade is a positive-sum game. In the historical context the historical need for such a theory was that England imposed those retaliatory tariffs on England in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. The idea was to punish France, but the high tariffs on imports from France only served the interest of the landed aristocracy in England. But Ricardo saw that the future of England is not in agriculture, but in industrial development. And then the first idea by Ricardo was to say, if we traded again with France and we removed the corn laws, then food prices would go down. If food prices go down, the industrialists have to pay less money to the workers, and the workers still can then buy the same basket of goods and services that they need in order to stay at a subsistence level. But then the industrialists, they make more profit, and then they will use those profits in order to have more factories, to create more jobs, have more employment. And a byproduct of the trade theory was also that it would have helped to overcome that Malthusian growth trap, or that alleged Malthusian growth trap. Okay, so I hope that is clear, and it is just a little bit of an historical context, which I hope you found interesting. And beginning with the next video, we actually jump now right into the actual theory, and it's a very beautiful theory, and I hope you will enjoy it. So I'll see you in the next video then.